Have you ever wondered? Ever wondered?
Dr. Garret Yount is a scientist at the Institute of Noetic Sciences, where his research focuses on mapping the mind-gene interface. Dr. Yount has a long-standing interest in developing methods and technologies for bridging molecular neurobiology, consciousness studies, and extended human capabilities. Dr. Yount was among the first scientists to be awarded a research project grant from the National Institutes of Health to study Qigong and other healing modalities. These experiments were highlighted in various media outlets and dramatized in the popular novel by Dan Brown, The Lost Symbol. Dr. Yount has conducted carefully controlled laboratory experiments with spiritual healers and biofield practitioners from around the world. Based on his experience, he has spoken nationally and co-authored scientific papers on the topic of establishing rigorous guidelines for research into biofields and psychokinesis. He is the author of many scientific papers and the book Why Vibes Matter. Thank you for joining me as I speak with Garret about the importance of vibrations in our everyday lives.
So it is delightful to have you, Garret. I absolutely love your approach to science, where you're applying the rigors of scientific research to, the wisdom traditions, but you not only research, but you also talk about your experiences in Why Vibes Matter, which is a fabulous book. I loved it. And so you do your really in-depth research, but you also talk about your experiences with some of the wisdom traditions, and then give people exercises that they can also, do to look into how these wisdom traditions could apply to their lives. So it's a fascinating book, and your research is fascinating. So I wondered what brought you to the point, as a molecular and cell biologist, to approach research in this way.
Well, thanks for having me, Carlene. What brought me to it really was experiences as a kid, where that we call them clairvoyant experiences, which got me interested in what's going on with the mind, and what everybody's talking about around me is like not the whole story for sure. So I started looking into literature, a lot of Eastern literature talking about theories of mind. And so it was just a passion of mine from a very young age. And then just in parallel, I really was into molecular biology. And so I had this goal of combining those. And it took a while to get to the point where I could do that. There had to be a lot of, nose to the grindstone, getting the PhD in molecular biology, and eventually found the Institute of Noetic Sciences, where I was able to be with a group of scientists that, as you say, want to apply the rigors of science to these, kind of woo-woo stuff. So I found my home here.
That's great. And I love that in the book you talk about actually going to different places, Europe and so forth, and learning under different teachers. And so I'd like to just take one aspect of the practice that you do, Qigong, and tell me what you learned by being not just studying Qigong, but as a practitioner of that tradition.
Yeah, Qigong is my favorite. And just to give a little intro to it, it's basically a form of meditation, but it's very body based. And so there's many different forms. Some of them all of them involve mind and body, movement and kind of meditation, but to varying degrees. So I think that's partly why I like Qigong, because it's more difficult for me to just do the sitting, quiet your mind meditation, because Qigong gives my mind something to do. I just think it's just a little bit easier. And then you can feel the sensations. And then when you feel the sensations called Qi, that just naturally quiets down my mind, the talking in my head. And then that facilitates that state of quiet mind, which is the same across all meditations. So, it's very simple to do. And, you can I can feel it being good for me. And then, of course, there's the research that kind of corroborates that in terms of the health benefits. And then I talk about in the book where there's lots of science doesn't know, we can't figure it all out, but that's not really necessary for you to just do it yourself and feel the benefits yourself.
And that's a great springboard into your research on vibrations and how the vibrations that we emit actually affect other people, and they can be measured, in the lab, which I think is fascinating. So tell us a little bit about that research.
Sure. To start, though, I want to just distinguish three types of vibes because, the vibes you're talking about this really cool research talked about in the book. But the word vibes is used so differently in popular culture. So it's really helpful, I think, before start talking about a certain type of vibe or a certain type of research is to put it in the context. So for simplicity, I talk about three types of vibes according to three levels of mind. So there's conscious vibes. These are vibes that you are, have to do with your conscious mind. So these are vibes you get from information coming in your senses that you are aware of. You see it right there, like a smile. The rustic theme at a wedding. They put things in the environment and the atmosphere to create people to have a certain emotional reaction, and you get a vibe. You walk in the room and you get a vibe because of consciously excited things in the environment. Then the two other levels are subconscious vibes and superconscious vibes. So the subconscious vibes are the ones that come from your subconscious mind. And the idea of that is that there's information coming to us that our senses don't pick up, but yet our body does, and our body reacts, and then it kind of bubbles up into our conscious mind as this vibe. So that's a subconscious vibe. And I can, a great example of that people like in the book is there's a chemical, an odorless chemical in women's tears. So you can't smell it, but you pick it up. And they showed that in men, this reduces their libido. And the point where they've measured testosterone decrease in the blood just from this odorless chemical that's being picked up from women's tears. And we could talk about the details of that experiment if you want. But so that's a subconscious vibe. It's coming, it's a real thing, but it's not at your conscious level. So it bubbles up and you feel it as a vibe. And then the third type of vibe, the superconscious vibe, is the one you mentioned. I did research with energy medicine practitioners and spiritual healers. That's where I believe that operates in the superconscious mind, which is the interconnected with everything mind, or the God mind. That's where our separateness from reality, the illusion of separation dissolves, and we're in that sea of being and presence. And that's where I think those superconscious vibrations can have an effect. So with that long kind of division, when you mentioned some of the cool research in the book about measuring vibes in the laboratory, this one, one of my favorites is research out of the Heart Math Institute in Boulder Creek, Colorado, who are measuring the electromagnetic fields that are generated from the body, and particularly from the heart, because our heart generates the largest electromagnetic field. And so this field is like a donut-shaped, invisible, like a tire around us. And this field, so these are vibrations coming out of our body. And what the heart math showed first that was so fascinating is that the ways that the waves look, kind of their signature, or the way, it changes according to your emotions. So if you're sitting there thinking loving thoughts, the field has a certain signature. And then they have the same person switch to thinking about, bad emotions, and it changes. And this can, as you say, can be measured with instruments. This is something where we got instruments measuring vibes. The craziest part is they showed that if you overlap your donut field with somebody else, that energy can be transferred. So this is evidence of what we all have been talking about forever is, hanging around with somebody with bad vibes, you can pick it up, or on the opposite, you can influence someone by trying to raise their vibes by just kind of sharing yours with them. So those subconscious vibes are actually measurable when you look at the electromagnetic field. Now, that's certainly only part of the vibes that our bodies involve, but it's really nice that you can see it with regular old instruments.
Yes. That to me is fascinating. And you talk about how one of the things that that we should maybe try is to raise the vibrational level of our own vibes. And you give some great practical points about how you can do that. And one of them, which I thought was marvelous, was being grateful for your life. So tell me about your grateful ritual that you talk about. That's lovely.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I talk about some simple ones in the book, but I can just tell you personally, it's a matter of waking up. Yeah, literally upon waking up in the morning, like to reflect on my dreams. If I'm stick with my regimen out, I want to write down in my dream log a bit, but at least just think about them. And then the very next thing I do before I get out of bed is just express out loud inside my head some gratitudes, like I'm grateful for this day, grateful for my family, grateful for the air, just anything. And it feels really good. And there's actually research showing that it has really positive effects. And I'm talking about well-designed research that compares it with other kinds of practices, so there's that in the book. But I want to emphasize that and you can tell me if you agree, the science is very light, it's very understandable. I didn't bombard ton of science about every little thing. I just picked out kind of my favorite ones to give a little sense that there is science behind these things.
It's one of the reasons, Garrett, I love this book because it's not just an academic exercise in, okay, we're going to talk about, the research. It's practical. And I think people really, they want that. They want to tie in the science with the experience. And then how do I make my life different through this research? And so a lot of times I think sort of the scientific community is sort of afraid to do that. They're like, okay, we have to just stick with the objective science. And I think they're missing a huge opportunity to help humanity. And it's one of the things I love about, ions and your research. And I think that, and let's go back fascinates me, your diagram, and everybody needs to read this book. They absolutely do, about the diagram of our consciousness, where a lot of things happen that we recognize, then the subconscious, and now I am absolutely fascinated also with the superconscious. Or is that so? My question right off is: so my son passed away in 2008, and I went to two really good psychics, and these gals, I mean, at first when I went, I was like, okay, this is, I was a skeptic, right? But there were things that they told me that I'm like, there is no way that they haven't tapped into some way that somewhere Jason's at. I mean, there were specifics that were just impossible, right? That they would have known about him. So how do you think that works with healers, with mystics or psychics? Do they tap into this sort of web or whatever? What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I think they tap into the superconscious mind where we're all connected. And of course, our notions of time don't operate there. I'll show that. I don't know if you can see this diagram you mentioned. I'm so glad they let me keep it in. So the big circle is the superconscious mind. And so just to describe it, if you think of two people, our conscious mind, two circles separate, because we think that we're an individual person and our ego is there driving that and, making sure that we can be protected and get the kind of things we want. And then the subconscious mind extends beyond that. And then there's some overlap there. And Carl Jung talks about the subconscious mind, the first ideas about there being overlap between people. But the superconscious mind envelops it all. And that's where our separation from others and other aspects of reality is dissolved. So, I'm not an expert on your question, but my answer would be, yeah, that's where you start talking about it, where everything is connected. And then again, also, of course, space, the ideas of space change and the ideas of time change there. I don't know how it works. That's exactly where I'd start talking about it in the superconscious mind.
Yes. And so consciousness, one of my fascinating, I'm fascinated with consciousness and whether consciousness is eternal or
Mm,
whether it dies with the brain, as a lot of, academics might tell us.
right.
So it would have to be, if we die and our consciousness lives on, that somehow it resides in that level, in that area. Whether a person wants to talk about reincarnation, I don't know how all that would
Mm,
would work out, but somehow, we never die. Our energy doesn't die,
yeah.
as Einstein says. So, so somehow, to me, that is so comforting, because it's like, if we are eternal beings, then what we do on this earth matters,
Mm.
and we are connected with our fellow human beings. It paints a really, to me, a beautiful picture of being a good person in this life and trying to
Mm.
do your best, so I applaud your research, because I think it makes a difference in humanity.
I hope so. I agree, and I really hope so. And I do think just by the act of an individual chilling down their vibes, I mean, because that's kind of the first step to all kinds of things, both understanding your vibes and your reactions to them, and building, yeah, generating compassion and understanding. And I think that the more people pay attention to their vibes, I think it's going to lead to a more peaceful society, in addition to healthier people. I mean, so because one aspect of the book just talks about the health, the direct, you can just start with that, But aside from that, is what I think you're alluding to, is peaceful society is going to also be a benefit of everybody paying attention to their vibes more.
Yes, and for our children and grandchildren, and you give some wonderful practical, like, even when you talk about the physical spaces that we have affect our moods. I just thought that was wonderful, because I've studied feng shui a little bit and so forth, but I think even the fact that color affects it, talk about that, those things in everyday life, maybe we should consider, clutter in the house, stuff like that.
Yeah, so much. There's so much to talk about with that. It's so much fun. I mean, on the one edge, with color, there's a whole field of color psychology, because color impacts our decisions. Of course, colors are different vibrations of light, and they induce different vibes in us, our sensed feelings. So even at the level of the conscious vibes, right? So there's marketing researchers have shown that color can be responsible for, I think it's up to 90% of snap judgments that we make about buying. So, keep that in mind when you're buying, snap judgments. But, and then it also goes down to the subconscious vibe level. So there's one experiment I really like. I call it the backpack experiment. And this is people come into a room. The researchers are a little bit deception involved. So they don't tell the participants exactly what's going on. They say, okay, go into this room and fill out these, do these tasks and questionnaires. And in one room, they go in, there's a backpack sitting on the side, just as if it was just left there. Like, oh, don't pay attention to that. In the other room, it's a briefcase. That shows that this was done a while ago, whenever briefcases were, really meant, business. But just they showed that just that thing on the side, which they didn't even think they were paying attention to, changed their competitiveness. They were more competitive when they're sitting in a room with a briefcase. So that's at the subconscious level. And then, yeah, again, always drifting into the superconscious vibes. I think that that's when we talk about places of ritual, like churches or mosques, where, over time, people are kind of dedicating that space to spiritual pursuits and intentions. And I believe that creates a vibe there that can influence the folks. Um, but you mentioned feng shui and all that. Just importantly, you can create that wherever you are. Really, you can create a space in your home. or if necessary, just kind of on the fly, if you're in a place and you really need to calm down, shut down your vibe, you can do things about your immediate space to be able to access that. So, but it's quite a range.
Yeah, the breathing that you talk about, because we all have these shallow breaths, right? So it's just like take 4 seconds, is it? Yeah.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
so I tell my
yeah.
grandkids when they get, a little crazy, let's just take a deep breath. And it's amazing how it affects them. It's like, and they're so sweet because they'll do it. They're like, okay, grandma, but it's like totally chills them out, at least for a few minutes,
It's so true.
Yeah, yeah. And then there's so much to ask you about the cancer, the experiments you guys have done at Ions with the cancer cells in the petri dish. Talk about that a little bit. That's just wild stuff.
Yeah, yeah, it is wild. So, you know, one of the questions about Qigong that I had, just as a scientist, not as a practitioner, or not as doing it myself. And just to be clear, there's external Qigong, which is kind of basically so internal Qigong is what I practice, which is your personal meditation, and that's moving the Qi in your own body to promote awareness and health. Um, but also there's external Qigong, which is it's believed that practitioners who've worked with their Qi long enough, they're able to emit it and influence another person's Qi. And so this is the basis of this kind of healing practices. And so from a scientific perspective, that's a pretty big deal. Like, okay, if you're going to be able to influence from a distance, I want to see that in the lab. This is so interesting. So I went over to China and went to the labs there and saw what they were up to and basically tried to replicate the experiments here in my lab. And I was experiencing some negative results. I was like, oh, it's not working. It's not working. So long story short, got advice that from William Tiller at Stanford University said the vibes in your lab are bad. You got bad vibes. That's why you're not getting anything. Because I was doing in my lab at the time, this was not at IONS, this was at UCSF. I was doing cancer research, as you mentioned, brain tumor. And so I was really looking at chemotherapies and radiation day and night, in this lab, ton of stuff going in. And then on the weekend, I'd bring in the Qigong master and, try to do this experiment. So the criticism was that my lab was steeped in bad vibes, kind of the opposite of the mosque and the church and the cathedral. It's like, okay, this is like, so he said, it's like a vibes war zone in there. And then the vibes of the Qigong masters is like, getting trampled on. Because you got to do it in a place where the vibes have been conditioned. And so we set up the experiment at IONS. It's the first experiment I did at IONS because they had this electromagnetically shielded room, which is basically like a steel box big enough for people to go in to block out electromagnetic fields. And there had never been any healing in there. There had never been any cancer, chemotherapy, radiation. So it was a blank slate. And so this is the first time I teamed up with Dean Radin, our chief scientist. I said, can I do it in the box? We call it the box, over the weekend. So we'd do a cell experiment with the petri dishes. And on Friday, Saturday, Sunday, prediction was that on Friday, it would be just like I, saw before, like I'm not getting reliable results. But right after doing it, then these 4 healing practitioners went in there. This was actually a Japanese form of Qigong called Jo-Rei. Wonderful, beautiful people. They went in and they started conditioning the space by praying and healing and chanting. I love chanting. And they just hours of it. And then day and night. And then we do another cell experiment on Saturday and another one on Sunday, thinking that by the time Sunday came, the conditioning of the space would allow the cells to respond more reliably. And it happened. On Sunday, we got it, the results were good and reliable. And then a kind of a side story is Dean Radin didn't tell us at the time. He was like, oh yeah, I'll be gone this weekend. You can just use it. But he left behind random number generators to be physical witness of the whole weekend. And his hypothesis was that if the vibes were conditioned, then these random number generators, which are designed to spit out random numbers very accurately, that the coherence in the kind of the local physics would influence the physics of the machines and they would become more coherent. and therefore less random, and the numbers coming out would be less random. And so he saw on Sunday as well this huge change in the randomness of the numbers looking more coherent, just like our cells were more responsive. And so that was a really, really fun experiment. And I think it is certainly the first, and I don't know how many, if it's happened again, experiment looking at a biological target and a physical, like a machine target in this type of intentional healing experiment. So yeah, I published that with Dean. Yeah, that was really fun.
And I know they've done some experiments on, prayer, and they've got not you guys, but other research where they've brought together, thousands of people to pray, and which is fascinating stuff. So I have a question about earthing. I think that is a marvelous. So I grew up on a farm in Montana, and we never wore our shoes, right? So it's like we're out in the soil all the time. Well, not all the time, but So I still love to go out in the garden at orchard and just walk, and I do feel that energy come up through the through your feet. Tell me about your research on that.
Yeah. So I can tell you about research that's been done. So I have not done any research. I've done like you. I have that feeling. I love going into the garden and just digging the dirt, feet, hands, any part of your body. I personally feel like that connection is enriching and energizing and calming. I think it's real. However, there are research that have looked at that, and I just, I think that's in terms of balancing the autonomic nervous system and immune function. So it's been kind of also bleeds over into just experiences in nature. So, you might not, of course, it would be nice not to have rubber-soled shoes when you're walking in nature, because that, diminishes kind of the transfer. But immersing yourself in nature, the sights, the sounds, the smells, and and invariably touch nature when you're out in there. That also tremendously good research on showing, just talking about one area of it, is improved immune function, which is such an important function of our body. I mean, this is one of the most important ones. So showing that walking in nature can improve that, it's just fabulous. And so I guess when I go off on the one side of earthing, saying that, just nature in general is helpful, I also want to point out what I learned in researching for the book is this technology for earthing where you can put a wire in the ground and goes into your bed. So there's technology for laying a sheet in your bed that will allow some of that earthing to be happening while you're sleeping, which I've never tried, but I'm like, that's really cool. Especially you think for folks that don't have they're not as fortunate as I am to be able to have a tiny little plot of dirt to mess around in. So, no matter where you are, because it's not a wire that goes from the ground up to your bed. It's a wire that goes into the building's electricity. And there's this 3 sockets, at least the way it's configured in the US. The one socket, the one little hole in the electric socket, that's the ground. So it's not for passing the electricity, it's for grounding it so that the electricity could pass out that. So that's connected. So basically it's a device that connects the Earth's energy to that grounding path. And so anywhere you have an electrical outlet in your home, whether you're in a 34-story high-rise building, if there's an electric socket, you would still be able to use this technology.
Interesting. For people who, can't get out and even maybe walk, like that you're bedridden or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Cool.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for mentioning that.
Yeah. So psilocybin, I would love to talk about that. You mentioned Michael Pollan and some of the research. So let's talk about that. That's fascinating. What you, again, in your book was wonderful.
I mean, I do call out some of the best authors on these topics, and Michael Pollan is one of those. I highly recommend his book for anybody interested in psilocybin and other type of psychedelic plants, and because he is first of all, a wonderful writer and so earnest. And he approaches it, he started being interested, in his 50s and had a lot of trepidation. So that's what I love about his book called How to Change Your Mind, is he's just very forthright about his cautiousness about it and who he talked to and all that. So I could not do that justice other than just ask, urge people to read his book. Um, but he talks about important aspects of having a psychedelic experience with plants. The most important ones being called set and setting. And so that is basically your mindset, what your intentions, the way you approach it, and then the setting is being in an environment where you feel profoundly safe. And important for that, I think basically the element that's most important would be to have a guide, somebody with you that's there to just make sure all that stays in place as you go through the process. And psilocybin, it's a trip, it can last 6 or 8 hours. And so you need to be able to have enough space to do that. And I wasn't able to put this in the book, but now that we're in your podcast, I can say that it is possible to find psilocybin assisting guides quite easily. People go through training to do this, and so you can do it in any setting. You can choose to do it, at your home or at the guide's home, and so that's quite accessible. You can find that through the internet. The publishers didn't want me to talk about that, but I was able to talk about centers where you can do it. For example, there's a center in Europe that gets around some of the laws because the mushroom, the psilocybin mushroom, has its little roots, which is called mycelium. And those also have the active ingredient, the psychedelic ingredient. So the laws only really talk about the blossoming mushroom part. So this center just harvests the mycelium, and then they create a retreat center that's got the setting, permanently there. And then, of course, they have the guides that I spoke about that are trained to help you get your mind in the right mindset. What are your goals? How do you want to approach this? What do you want to get out of it? And it's quite a profound experience, which I believe gets you in touch with the superconscious mind and the superconscious vibes. And I also say that I think it's the same place that you get by lots and lots of meditation. So, there is something to be said about, okay, do you want to just do it with just meditating, or do you want a little help? And yeah, there's lots of discussion about that. I personally think if you do it carefully and you think about set and setting and you have a guide, it can be very safe and beneficial. And not to mention the research.
And I was going to talk about like the research they've done with vets, and it's beautiful. It can go in and access that part of the brain that where change can be permanent. It's almost like with meditation, it takes a while, I think, to develop the ability to get to that level. Whereas with maybe some of the plant medicine, we can get there quicker. But yeah, you're right. I think you've got to have a really experienced guide. And but speaking of things that you guys are doing, which I think is fascinating, is the waking dream. Your research, because it seems like does the same thing. It gets people in that vibe, in that level where they can make changes in this life. Tell us about that research.
Absolutely, it's very profound, transformative experiences in lucid dreaming. So we've done experiments on lucid dreaming, collaborating with a fabulous lucid dreaming teacher named Charlie Morley in London, who I met because he had a lot of experience working with veterans with PTSD and helping them transform their trauma through dreaming. And so he had been doing this, lots of success, got a Winston Churchill Fellowship Award to work with veterans. And so we said, let's collaborate to see if we can put some science in this and look this out. So the first pilot study we did, kind of the pilot study is just to see if things are going to work. And I was worried that us poking and prodding and asking questions and being part of a scientific study might mess with Charlie's mojo, and it might interfere with people's ability to attain lucidity or work with their dreams. And the exact opposite happened. We had a group of 50 dreamers, 76% of them had at least one lucid dream during just the 1 week workshop, which was a very high percentage based on previous work. So first thing we found out is the way that, at least the way we applied the science, didn't interfere with folks getting lucid. And there was tremendous improvement at the end of the week, and we looked a month later still in terms of symptoms of PTSD going down. This is by self-report on a questionnaire that's used to determine a variety of symptoms, and then a separate questionnaire about experience of nightmares. So there was great improvement in that. And that, I could go on and on about this. For sure, the testimonials from the folks were amazing in terms of, having working for 10 years psychotherapy trying to deal with this, and then after 1 week suddenly they're not afraid to go to sleep, all these changes in their life. So very, very powerful. Charlie Morley, morley.com, you can find him. And I would emphasize that even the people, so it was very intense working with dreams. So every morning the group would be together, they'd talk about dreams, lucid and non-lucid, and Charlie would talk them through what dreams are about, interacting with your subconscious, and about nightmares. Nightmares are actually really powerful and useful. Like to forget about a nightmare and push it away is the worst thing to do, because it's your subconscious saying, I need help. Let's work on this. And so importantly, folks in the study that went through all this and didn't get lucid still had benefit as well, just by spending that time with their dreams and reframing what is a nightmare? What does it mean to have a nightmare? So you didn't have to get lucid. So I think it's important to say for a number of reasons, but one is like it's hard to get lucid, especially when you don't have an amazing teacher like Charlie. Although lots of people, just read a book or learn a technique, you can achieve it. But I would want everybody to know that if you have the intention of transforming your trauma in your dreams, and you just remembering your dreams and thinking about them, sharing them, that is enough as well. That can really be helpful. So if you try and you don't get lucid within a week, don't get frustrated. You could already be getting the benefit. And then if you do keep trying, you get lucid. Everybody's able. Yeah.
So the definition of lucid would be if while you're in your dream, that's okay. No, because while you're in the dream, you can almost enter into that dream and say, I'm dreaming, and then talk to yourself.
So yeah, you wake up with your waking consciousness the way that you and I are interacting right now, but you stay in the dream state. So you realize, oh, my body's in bed and I'm in the dreamscape. So this is just I'll tell you one of the techniques that kind of just explains it a little bit. Like one of the techniques is when you're going to sleep, give yourself this suggestion, like, I'm going to look at my hand in my dream tonight. I'm going to look at my hand in my dream tonight. I'm going to look at my hand in my dream tonight as you're falling asleep. And then you're dreaming, something's going on. Maybe you're sword fighting and your hand comes and you're like, oh, I said I was going to look at my hand in my dream tonight. The I that said that is the I that's asleep and I'm in the dream. So it's that transfer over to your waking consciousness. And there's really cool neuroscience that shows what happens, because this part of your brain, the prefrontal cortex, that is normally shut down during normal dreaming, and also, and all part of that is how you're aware that we paralyze our limbs, while we're sleeping. But whenever you become lucid in the dream, whenever you remember your dreaming, that part of the brain wakes up, which is the part that they talk about, the sense of self and executive function. So like you said, then you're in the dream and you can direct things. And so part of the healing lucid dream workshop that Charlie Morley did was to have a dream plan. Once you wake up in your dream, then you have this plan to transform your trauma. And it's different for every single person. And, it can be quite general, like, I want to meet my inner child, or, just something that you feel can be healing and integrating. And it can be very specific. And it's quite powerful. And so we did that pilot study, fantastic results, got it published in the journal called Traumatology, which is a mainstream journal, APA. So now that information will be out there. And we just completed a replication where we did it again, but with the randomized control trial design, the way that NIH studies drugs. So we have 100 people this time. Half of them waited to have the workshop with Charlie so that they were just living their life. And so we could compare any changes between the two groups. And then later on, they got their workshop with Charlie. And so we're just in the process of analyzing those data now. So we'll see if we can replicate it with a control group. So that'll be very exciting. Hope to be able to tell you about that a little bit.
Oh yeah, I would love to. When you write are you going to write a book about this or what?
We're going to write a paper. We're going to submit it to a peer-reviewed scientific journal.
Yes.
Just like the one that's just now out in traumatology. So
That's
great. We could give a link to that.
Sure.
If you like,
Absolutely.
People can read about the pilot study.
Absolutely. Yeah. And what's in your future? What are you going to, probably not done quite with the lucid dreaming study, but do you have anything?
Yeah, we're wrapping that up, and what we're gearing up, I'm very excited about an experiment on telepathy.
Oh, wow.
And there's a little bit in the book about an experiment done in 2015 that Dean Radin and Marilyn Schlitz, who's another scientist, did with gut telepathy. So instead of measuring the brain waves in a telepathy experiment, they measured the gut, the enteric nervous system, or our gut brain. And kind of the idea was, everybody's familiar with the monkey mind, and if you're filling out a questionnaire, you're like, okay, well, the last three answers were A, so it can't be A again, that type of like second guessing yourself. And so part of their, idea back in 2015 was that the gut wouldn't have that monkey mind problem and might have more reliable signals. So they have a sender trying to send emotional feelings, and then the receivers, eyes closed, got electrodes on the belly. So that was a pilot study, and it worked. Really cool results. And so what I'm setting up now, along with Dean again, is to replicate that with control design and also some amped up kind of protocols for the sender. But I can't tell you because some of the subjects, if you're in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area, who would like to be in the study, give me an email.
Very cool.
And again, I can't give like the secret sauce, but we're making it really, really fun.
Oh my gosh.
And hopefully that'll give like really good results too. So we're looking for the gut reaction to telepathic signals. And I just can't wait to do that.
Oh, that'll be fun. And the gut is such a fabulous, the gut is so much more complicated than anybody, we think, the brain is, the center of everything. But a lot of people are saying it's actually the gut is, our intuition is, lodged there, whatever. Yeah.
Yep. It's a very underappreciated part of our nervous system. It's got a ton of neurons.
Yes.
All the neuropeptides that work in the brain work there. There's a ton of crosstalk. And so it's very conceivable that there are emergent properties of the gut nervous system that we're operating. And, I feel like if telepathy is part of our abilities, then I think that our gut brain is going to be part of that as well.
And the way it communicates with, the brain, like that direct communication level is absolutely fascinating too.
And like you say, gut feelings is something that has been talked about forever. That's got to come from somewhere. And the feeling of it, everybody has that feeling, right?
Yes. And when intuition kicks in, for me at least, it doesn't necessarily come through my brain. Like it's a thing, a physical, feeling that and it's the gut really, for me anyway, that tells me don't go there.
Exactly. And one quick call out to our founder, Edgar Mitchell, who founded the Institute of Noetic Sciences 50 years ago, an astronaut, the sixth man to walk on the moon. And I start the book with a quote from him because that's why he named the Institute Noetic Sciences, based on his realization, this epiphany he had from space looking at Earth, that there's more than just the intellectual pursuit of knowledge. There's this inner knowing, which is where noetic comes from, and how important that is. So I'm glad you emphasized that. That's something that kind of is the binding concept and theme of all the work we do here at IONS.
Oh, it's beautiful research, and I so appreciate you taking the time. I know you're very busy to talk with us, and I would love to have you back, Garret, when you're, later on as you get some of your other projects, and you feel like it's time to go out to the world or whatever.
Yeah, please.
So that'd be really fun. So, and thank you for your research. It's so refreshing. I spent so many years in academia where it just seemed, I don't know, the connection between research and how we live. Sometimes there was a disconnect there, and the research you do is just so important. So thank you so much for it.
You're welcome. I would also say about that, what you just said is so important about the research being out there and how does it, impact real life. So IONS has this whole other department called the experience department, where that's kind of their goal, is to take the science and turn it into courses and seminars for people to just have their own real lived experience of it. So if you go on the website, you can find the science stuff, see what we're up to, and the other scientists as well. But there's also the experience part, which I would recommend people go to as well.
Thank you again, Garret. You've been delightful. And I love this book. I just love it so much.
Thank you.
So I'm anxious to see more books come from you.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Okay.
It was a pleasure.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Garret. Thanks.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining me today in my interview with Dr. Garret Yount. If you'd like to know more about Garret's research, go to my website, haveyouvewonderedpodcast.com, and look under guests.
Have you ever wondered? Ever